Hello. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So the topic for today's class is history taking in ophthalmology. Now, to begin with, I would like to emphasize that history taking is actually a skill. It's an art. And over the years of my experience as a medical student, all my professors all over these years, they've always told me that it's the most basic and the most important skill that has to be learned to at least become a good clinician. And not just to become a good clinician, to be able to even reach a diagnosis or to be able to reach a differential diagnosis, you have to be able to elicit a very good history. Now, how can you make sure that you elicit a good history? That is, so basically, you have to learn it over time, first of all. And the second thing is that there is a structured pattern of history taking where there's an actual format where in what you're supposed to record history. So even if you do not have those formats in the hospital, you should know that this is the order in which the history is supposed to be taken. So after following the format, you have to be able to ask relevant questions. Now, how do you do that? Like, how do you know what question that you're going to ask is supposedly relevant? Now, that can only be established if you know your theory very well. So you have to know the subject very well to be able to connect the dots, right? So you have to be very relevant in asking, okay, for example, the patient has said that I have come with redness in the eye. Now, there are a million things in ophthalmology which could lead to just redness in the eye. So now you need to ask specific questions that could that could lead you to, okay, this could probably be the cause of the redness. So you have to make sure that you are asking relevant questions, and that can only and only happen if you have a very strong theory background and your basics are very strong. And besides asking relevant questions, you also have to be able to retrieve a lot of relevant information. Again, to retrieve a lot of relevant information, first of all, you as a clinician should know what is relevant and what is relevant for the history of redness. You, in your clinic, in your during your postings or whatever, you will find a multitude, a variety of patients, and they will come to you with uh, a lot of problems, and they'll be of all kinds. So sometimes they'll just be like, you ask them one question and they give you a story behind it, and that entire story is not something you need. You just need the relevant information out of it, right? So you ask them, for example, if you just ask them how are you, they will tell you the story of the entire week, right? The day before I was this, and then this happened, and then that happened. But that's not what you need to know. So you need to be able to actually extract a lot of relevant information from the patient. And on the other hand, you might have patients who are very introvert and they do not speak to you at all. So again, you need to develop that skill, that how do you extract information or relevant information from these kind of patients, right? So again, as I said, you need a systematic approach to it, and you should be able to derive. At the end of the history, you should have at least like a few differential diagnoses by the end of what you've extracted so far. So history taking, as I said, there has to be a structured pattern in taking the history. So the complete history taking should be structured. Like in the first section, you will have the demographic data of the patient. In the next section, you will have their chief presenting complaints. In the following section, you're going to have the history of presenting illness, which basically gives or elaborates on your presenting complaints. Following that, you will have history of past illnesses. Then you have your personal history, and then the family history of the patient. We'll now look into each of these in the following slides. So the first one is your demographic data. What it tells you is it's basically to identify the patient, to build a rapport with the patient, and also it can help you to follow up the patient, because now you know, okay, for example, if it's a ward and you have 100 patients, and sometimes in the ward we'll have 5 patients who are Ram, right? So we will not know what, like which Ram are we talking about, or which Ram are we going to do what with, or what is the treatment plan for each of them. So you obviously have to know the name. You have to have the name on their sheets. You have to have their address, in case age and address will help you, identify each patient if there are multiple patients of the same name. So yeah, and after that, when you ask about the age, now age is a very, very important data, because there's a lot about the disease or a disorder that they have can be told to you just by their age. So because certain diseases, they will present at certain age of life. For example, the congenital diseases or the hereditary diseases, they will usually present at an earlier age. Now, for example, in ophthalmology particularly, when you see like buphthalmos or microcornea or sclerocornea or something like that, okay, fine, this is something that's going to be seen in a child. And then other than that, on the other extreme, you have degenerative diseases. Those will actually present in the elderly population. For example, you can have senile cataract, and senile cataract will usually be seen around patients of the age of 60 or so. And then you can have age-related macular degeneration, again, which is, since the name itself says it's age-related, it happens in the elderly population. Also, age can be very, very important, because the same disease, for example, let's just talk about cataract, that itself can present at any stage in life. Because what is cataract? It's just an opacity in the lens, right? Which is causing some sort of visual impairment. Now, this can actually be present in a child who's just born. It can be present in a child who's probably in his early teens. It can present in a young age individual. It can present in an elderly. So now, how age is important here is when it's in a newborn. It can either be congenital, right? So then you have to rule out the congenital causes of cataract. For example, now you will rule out torch infections, or you'll ask the mother for a history of torch infections. If it is in a young child, you have to rule out developmental cataract, and accordingly, you have to ask relevant questions for that particular age group and rule out what is the etiology of cataract in that child. Then in a young adult, if it's a unilateral cataract, for example, it's only in one eye, then the most common cause for that cataract would be probably a trauma that the patient has suffered from. Then again, now if you come to the elderly population, then the most common would be a senile cataract, right? So age is a very, very important data. It can give you a lot of information. It can help you to reach your diagnosis and to rule out certain etiologies just on the basis of the age. Then the next very important data is the gender or the sex of the patient. Now, again, why is this very important? Is because certain diseases are either gender specific, okay, or they are predominant in either of the genders. So, for example, males, they in ophthalmology, I'll only be speaking of examples from ophthalmology, because uh, that's what I'm here to do. So, in males, central serous chorioretinopathy is a condition that is going to be more commonly seen in males, right? And in females, on the other hand, for example, thyroid ophthalmology is 6 times more common in females compared to males. For that matter, autoimmune diseases, which would, like lead to conditions in the eye, for example, peripheral ulcerative keratitis or keratoconjunctivitis sicca, anything that is related to autoimmune diseases, since that they are more common in females. So even the ocular presentations of autoimmune diseases will be more common in females. Then coming on to the occupation, this also could tell you a lot about the etiology of the disease, or the risk factors of the disease that the patient has presented to you with. Now, for example, again, we say cataract. They tend to be earlier in patients who work in a very heated environment. There is this hypothesis. So patients who work in blast furnaces or brick kilns or mines or things like that, they tend to develop cataracts earlier. But that's obviously not the only cause. It could be a risk factor for the causation. Then there are certain, you all know that people who work in dye industries, they are more prone to certain sort of cancers or tumors. And a lot of people who works in factories and mining, that they are exposed to a lot of trauma. So, and also we get a lot of patients who do welding and things like that, and they present with a lot of opacities in their cornea. So we know that they have suffered from recurrent trauma from small, minute foreign bodies, which they have not even realized, and they've gone unnoticed. But if they present to you with something, you will realize that there are a lot of opacities on the cornea, and then you ask for their profession and they'll be like, oh yes, I'm a welder by profession, and that then you will be able to pick up, okay, fine, all these opacities are because there have been a lot of unnoticed minor traumas to the eye, right? So the ergonomics of the work environment are also very, very important in the history. Now, about religion, there are a lot of religious practices which predispose us to certain diseases. And so you realize that demographic data itself could tell you a lot about how or what is the patient presenting with. If you don't know anything, just this much part can tell you a lot. And after that, what we have is the chief complaint. And so, what is chief complaint? It's actually the complaint that the patient is presenting with, right? So it is the symptom that has actually made the patient seek medical attention, or it tells you why has the patient come to the hospital. Now, the chief complaint, it has to be recorded with the duration of symptoms. That is very, very important, right? And in case there are multiple chief complaints, you have to record them in a chronological order. So starting from the complaint that started the first, then you record the next chief complaint or the next presenting complaint. It has to be in order of the duration since when it is presenting. So for example, you have redness and for example, you just had redness. So you're only required to record redness in the right eye since 5 days. But if the patient says, I have redness and I have discharge and redness is present, so you have to figure out which is the one that presented earlier, right? So you'll be like, okay, fine, the patient now has redness in the right eye since 5 days, along with discharge in the right eye since 3 days. So that completes your chief complaint. So also you need to know what all can a patient present with in an ophthalmology clinic. So the most common complaint is diminution of vision. Now that opens a wide array of, differential diagnosis. If you have only this much information that patient has diminution of vision, it could be anything. It from outside to inside, it could literally just be anything from just dry eye to keratoconjunctivitis to uveitis to cataracts to glaucoma to some pathology in the retina. So this is a very generic thing. That is why it is very important that you go further from here and you ask relevant questions, which could actually, lead you to some diagnosis. Other than that, the patients can present with watering or discharge or redness. Now, these 2-3 things, they will tell you that, okay, something is really active, the disease is active or it is inflamed. Then the patient can also present to you with asthenopic symptoms, right? So what is asthenopia? It's actually just strain or headache when the patient is trying to do some near work. Okay, it will tell you that the patient has probably a latent visual alignment disorder. That's probably a phoria or a refractive error. Then they can also present to you with photophobia. Now, what is photophobia? It's actually abnormal sensitivity to normal intensity of light. Some days you are like on normal days, you're able to bear a certain amount of light, but if that normal light becomes overtly sensitive for your eyes, that means you've now developed photophobia. Then you can have if you have an ocular surface problem, then you can have burning, itching, or foreign body sensation, grittiness. The patient can also present with pain. Again, this just pain can again tell you that, okay, this literally could be anything from the, like front to back. If you start with the lids, it could be literally, it could be anything. Again, from dry eye to uveitis, keratitis, glaucoma, it could actually just be anything. So you should be very, very thorough. You should know how, all the common diseases present in ophthalmology. Only then will you be able to do justice to the patient or come to a diagnosis. And the other thing they could present with is deviation of eye, now which this kind of almost clearly tells you that it's going to be some strabismus. Then the patient may present to you with double vision, but the thing is that sometimes they get confused. They will say that we see two we having a double vision. Now they can confuse it with blurred vision. So how do you become sure that it's not blurred vision and it's double vision is when you ask them, okay, do you see two separate images? They'll be like, oh yes, I do see separate images. But you also have to make sure that they see one image which is sharp and focused, or like clear, and the other image that is the doubled image that is going to be blurred. Then they might also be able to see black spots in front of the eyes, which are scientifically known as floaters. And they tell you that, okay, now the disease is probably somewhere in the vitreous or the retina, or there is some media opacity that is present. Then they can also present to you with colored halos. Okay, so that tells you, okay, either there is some sort of corneal edema, or there is mucopurulent conjunctivitis, or sometimes, you will have to be able to differentiate between these two. But it gives you a clue as to what, it probably is, and you have to ask the next questions accordingly. Then they can also come to you with distorted vision. Now, again, distorted vision could be either because of cornea having sort of irregularity, like irregular astigmatism or keratoconus, or it could be because of a macular pathology, right? So these are the list of common presenting complaints that the patients who come to our clinics usually have. Then moving on to the history of presenting illness. Now again, this basically has to be recorded in a particular order, so that there's a set questions that you ask so that you come to a diagnosis. So you ask with the onset of symptom, right? So whether it has presented in the last 5 days, or it has been present since 5 years, whether it's suddenly appeared, or like it has been present since a long time, that tells you that this is the onset. So what happens is, if it's a long duration thing, like if it started 2-3 years ago, okay, fine, this is something that has been chronically present. So we have to think in terms of diseases that are chronically present. If something presents acutely, it's either there must have been an inciting event that caused it to present now, or there could have been a trauma or something like that. So your line of thought has to, changes with the onset of the disorder. Then coming to the course of the disease, you have to be able to derive from them that whether the disease, for example, if it is present since 3 years, whether the disease has worsened, or the presentation of the disease has worsened in these 3 years, whether it has remained constant in these 3 years, or it has become better over the years. So a thing like, for example, cataract, it would have progressed over the 3 years, right? Or if it has been a refractive error, if it hasn't changed much, then they'll say, yeah, it's been present since 5 years, but there does not seem like a change. So okay, there's something that probably would not change over the years. Or if it has reduced, then you can probably be like, okay, that was if the presenting complaint is, for example, they have distorted vision, and they say that, okay, I noticed it 2 months ago, but now it seems to have reduced. So it has spontaneously come down. Probably it could be central serous chorioretinopathy. So the natural history of the disease, when you read it in theory, you will be able to relate it with the duration or the course of the disease, right? So the next thing is duration, which you almost always record even in the chief complaints. Along with that, you have to know the severity of the complaint, right? So if now the patient is coming to you with pain, then they'll be able to tell you whether it's a mild dull aching pain or a very sharp pain, so much pain that they are not able to open their eyes, right? Or for example, if the patient has had a cataract, now they're going to have diminished vision. So like, is it so diminished that you're not able to perform your routine activities or your daily activities, and is it hindering you in your work or job? Then the next question is, you ask where, like, the location of the complaint, right? So whether it's only one eye involved or both the eyes are involved. Okay. And then you have to ask relevant associated symptoms with it. For example, the patient comes to you with diminished vision. Now there are a lot of causes that could, a lot of diseases which would cause an like a sudden onset diminution of vision associated with pain. Some may be painless. So when you have that information with you, now when you add these two together, you will be able to rule out a lot of diseases that could have come with just diminution of vision, right? So that is very important. I'll give you a few examples towards the further slides. Then you have to ask about any similar problems in the past, like similar complaints in the past. So you'll know, again, this will also hint towards the chronicity of the disease, or like whether a disease is recurrent, or it had resolved earlier, or it has continued since so long, right? And then you also have to be able to ask relevant negative history. Now again, I would like to emphasize that negative history you'll only be able to ask if you know your subject well, and what a particular complaint could be associated with, and then only you'll be able to rule out the diseases with the negative history. Along with that, you need to know if the patient has gone to somebody and taken or seeked help from somebody and taken any sort of medical advice for the complaint before they have come to you. You have to have a record of it, and you have to also, record the current medications that the patient is on for this particular complaint. I'll give you a few examples here as to how to record these. So, for example, this is a patient, Raju, who's a 59-year-old male. So it tells us that probably we'll be dealing with some diseases that are present in the elderly population. So he's from Shahadra and he's a security guard by profession. Okay. Now he's complaining that he's had diminution of vision in both eyes since 6 years. So we know that it's something that has been chronically present and it has started 6 years ago. Then on the history of presenting illness, he says that, okay, it's a gradual onset diminution of vision and it's slowly progressing and it's been present since 6 years. Now it is, why is this making it so bad for him? Because, he's not able to, first of all, he's a guard by profession, so he should be able to see clearly. Now he's having difficult to identify people or objects at a distance, and hence he's not able to perform his job so well. Now, when we ask further questions, we ask him, okay, fine, do you think that it aggravates during a certain, is it fluctuating, is it constant? So he tells us that, okay, we have this complaint, it worsens during the day, I'm able to see better at night. So now this will give you a lot of information. Why? Because in bright daylight, what will happen is the pupil will constrict, right? So whatever, if there is a media opacity in the in the visual axis, all those will become more apparent, because in night, what happens is that the pupil will dilate. So you'll be able to see through the periphery as well, not just from the central visual axis, right? So this gives you a very important information that whatever is the pathology, it's lying in the visual axis or right in the center. And then you ask for relevant negative history, whether it's associated with pain, redness, photophobia, or watering or discharge. Now, if he says no, it's not associated with any of it, it kind of rules out any active inflammation or infection for now, right? Then we ask him, okay, whether it's associated with floaters or flashes. So if he says no, it's not associated, then you rule out any vitreoretinal pathology. Then if he says, okay, it's not associated with colored halos also, then you know that, okay, this has ruled out corneal edema from either acute congestive glaucoma or mucopurulent conjunctivitis. Then if we ask him, okay, do you have history of diplopia and polyopia, and he refuses, then you rule out a lot of other set of disorders like strabismus, early cataract, and dislocated lens, which would probably lead to these factors. Then you ask him for history of trauma, because traumatic cataract is an entity altogether. And he goes like, no, we don't have history of trauma. There is no history of similar complaints in the past. And he says that, okay, I'd gone to a local hospital 2 years ago, and where he was told that he has to undergo surgery, but he did not comply. So with all this information, you know that it is a gradual onset diminution of vision, which is painless. So then you have a certain array of disorders which will present with a gradual painless diminution of vision, right? So then you can think, okay, maybe refractive error, but why would it be present in 6 years? Okay, most likely in this case, it would be a cataract that has presented. So another example that I would like to tell you is, for example, there's this young male Raman who's young female Raman who's a 25-year-old female from Ramesh Nagar in Delhi, and she's a housewife. All right. And why sometimes, you have to record the informant. If the patient is a child, it is very important to record the informant, because the child might not give you relevant history. The accompaniments, if they are family, if they're the father or the mother, they'll be able to give you good history or relevant history. But if they've brought around people from the neighborhood, they will not give you any relevant history. So, the reliability of the history also depends on the informant. If it is self in an adult, that's good. But in a child, you have to make sure that the history is taken from somebody who really knows what is going on with the child. Then, okay, she's complaining of drooping of both upper lids since 3 years. All right. So, and on the history of presenting illness, she says that it's been gradual, it is progressive, and it is so severe that she is not able to visualize things because of the drooping eyelids, and she needs to elevate her chin to be able to see. And then one very important history, she says that, okay, when we ask her whether is it constant or fluctuating, she'll be like, okay, it increases during the evening, right? Or it becomes better during the early hours of the day. So now you will start thinking in terms of, is it myasthenia gravis? Because it's a young female, right? It's an autoimmune disease. It's a young female. She's complaining of increased worsening during the evening. That means when she's fatigued, the things get worsened, right? So that kind of clinches you to, okay, fine, this could be probably a ptosis because of myasthenia gravis, right? And then they tell you, okay, there's no history of trauma, so you've ruled out a traumatic cause for the ptosis. There's no history of constant rubbing or chronic irritation or surgery of the eyelid. That rules out the aponeurotic causes of ptosis. Or there is no history of swelling of the eyelid. That rules out mechanical causes for the ptosis. All right, so and if they tell you, okay, there's no history of diplopia, that means some neurogenic causes like third nerve palsy has been ruled out. So this is how you're supposed to rule in the diseases by the positive history and rule out the diseases with relevant negative history. So again, it needs to be very systematic and detailed. And in case of multiple complaints, you have to again follow the chronology of the symptoms and elicit history for each of the presenting complaints separately with relevant negative history and relevant positive history for each complaint. And the chief complaint and your history of presenting illness, it has to be recorded in the patient's own words and not in medical terminology. So I'll take you to a few slides which will tell you the causes of various conditions. For example, the first one being sudden painless loss of vision. So it could be because of a central retinal artery occlusion. This is the first image shows you the central retinal artery. One second. Yeah. So this is the image that shows you a central retinal artery occlusion. This is very significant. It's a cherry red spot which you see on a central retinal artery occlusion. Okay. So these kind of patients, they will present with a sudden loss of vision, which is painless. Then a massive vitreous hemorrhage because of probably the patient has had diabetes since very, very long. And now proliferative diabetic retinopathy has developed and it suddenly bleeds and, there's a massive vitreous hemorrhage. So what happens is the patient, so here what relevant history you will get is that the patient is a known diabetic since so many years, probably an uncontrolled diabetic, and is on so many medications, and has now come with sudden painless loss of vision, right? So you could suspect a massive vitreous hemorrhage in them. Then a patient who is probably a myopic, they're more prone to rhegmatogenous retinal detachment. So again, if there's a sudden painless loss of vision with associated history that, okay, he's been a patient of myopia since very, very long. So that could, lead you to or clinch you to a diagnosis of a retinal detachment. Then also another example is an ischemic central retinal vein occlusion. Now, these examples are for gradual painless diminished vision, and the most common of them being refractive errors, right? And then you have cataract, which is the second most common differential of a gradual painless diminution of vision. Okay, this the first image here is the image of a cataract. That's how it looks. And then you have anything that would, obscure the visual axis, like a progressive pterygium or a grade 4 pterygium involving the pupillary region. That will lead to a gradual painless diminution of vision. Then there can be age-related macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy. Now, so for each of these complaints, also you will have a lot of associated history which would lead you to these diagnoses. Then talking about sudden painful loss of vision. Now in this, the first image that you see here is that of an acute congestive glaucoma, right? You see a lot of redness. The patient would come to you with, okay, I've suddenly had blurring of vision or diminished vision and it's very, very painful. And there's a lot of redness here. And, when you see the patient, you will see that there's corneal haze. Yeah, and sometimes patients may tell you that, okay, previously I've had history of color. I mean, I do see colored halos on and off, but I haven't really paid attention to it. And suddenly the patient comes to you in an acute attack of glaucoma, right? Then there can be the second image that you see here is that of acute iridocyclitis or uveitis, right? So what happens is, again, they'll also present with sudden painful loss of vision, but they might have had history of a lot of diseases that would cause uveitis. For example, tuberculosis, leprosy, a lot of things that will present as uveitis, a lot of systemic conditions that would present as uveitis, or probably a history of trauma may be present, right? For that to be a traumatic uveitis. So, you have to be able to really ask relevant questions. That's the most important part of the history. Then, for example, a chemical injury to the eyeball, right? Now, your questions could also tell you what prognosis the patient is eventually going to be with. So if there's a history of chemical injury, and you ask the patient, okay, whether if they know, first of all, whether it's an acidic thing or an alkali. So then, if the patient knows that, okay, fine, it was an acid, then, your prognosis is better. If it's an alkali injury, the prognosis is going to be bad. So then the next one is mechanical injuries to the eyeball. That they'll obviously tell you that they got hit by something and then they've suddenly developed diminished nerve vision, which is very, very painful. Other than that, there can be gradual painful diminution of vision. So now you know that the diseases that we're going to deal with in this section will be chronic diseases, right? So again, it can be chronic iridocyclitis, a keratitis, or things like that. Then moving on to the past history. So, okay, other than, in the history of presenting illness, other than these complaints, patients can sometimes present to you with a lot of other visual phenomenon like glare, floaters, flashes, metamorphopsia, colored halos, diplopia, and surface problems like irritation, lacrimation, red eye, foreign body sensation. So you have to be able to ask and come to a conclusion as to what could the possible diagnosis be. Then moving on to the past history. So the past history, you can divide that into two sections. First one being the ophthalmic part or the ocular complaints, and the second one being your systemic complaints. So in the ocular part, you need to ask history of similar ocular complaints in the past. Whether what this tells you is if it's the first time that this has happened and there is no past history of this disease, that means there has to be an inciting event to the symptomatology. So what happens is then you have to find out what that inciting event is, because if you do not find the root cause, you will not be able to treat the patient other than if you just want to treat symptomatically, right? So also it tells you, okay, that if there have been past complaints of the same disease or same presentation, then it could either be a recurrence of a disease, right, which had before it had resolved and now it has recurred, or it could be a reactivation of a chronic underlying disease. Now, for example, we have viral keratitis. If it's caused by herpes simplex, this might recur a few times. So the patient might have a history of pain, redness, watering, chronically present for so many years on and off. If they take medication, it becomes better. But if they stop medications, or if there's any inciting event, for example, if there's trauma, or if there's any, fever, or that if there's any immunocompromised state, it will again reactivate. So that also gives you a lot of information if they've had a past history of similar complaint. Other than that, if there are similar complaints in the other eye. Now, there are so many diseases which may, either present bilaterally, but maybe asymmetric at the time of presentation. For example, if you have thyroid eye disease, most of the times, like 80-85% of the times, it's going to be a bilateral condition. If there's, Graves' ophthalmopathy, it's going to be present bilaterally. But they might not present at the same stage or at the same level in both the eyes. One may show severe symptoms one may, for example, one eye may be severely proptosed, but the other eye may not be at that stage yet. So you have to see whether, both the eyes are affected. And if the patient is saying, okay, I'm seeing a change in both the eyes, that means, okay, that's some condition that majorly would present bilaterally. Right, and also you have to know that sympathetic ophthalmitis, that's also a condition that will eventually lead to involvement of the other eye, and that's how you call it a sympathetic ophthalmitis. Then if it is not present in the other eye, for example, there's a cataract, and this is only a unilateral presentation. Usually a senile cataract would present in both the eyes. But if it's a cataract and it's a young patient and it's a unilateral presentation, then the first thing you would want to know whether the patient has had a history of trauma. So that becomes your next question, whether the patient has had a history of trauma to the eye in the past. Now, this is very important, and it's also very important for you to be able to extract this information, because of a lot of times the patient who've suffered from minor trauma or trivial trauma, they will not be able to remember it and they might not tell you that history, right? So you have to look for, while taking the history, you also have to observe the patient. You might be able to pick up scars on their face, and you have to be able to ask them whether, okay, what is this for? I mean, have you ever suffered from a trauma? What is this scar for? And, like anything like that, and any minor history of fall or a history of fall of a object on their head, or a history of collision or a history of trauma by the ball. They're all very, very important because these could actually lead to diseases with time. For example, it could lead to a cataract, as I already said, a traumatic cataract. It could lead to an angle recession glaucoma. It could cause commotio retinae or Berlin's edema, as you know it. And also it could lead to blowout fractures, right? Then the next question that you have to ask them is the history of ocular surgery in the past, okay? Because that could also tell you a lot about the etiology of the disease that they're suffering from. For example, if a patient has had open angle glaucoma, he's suffering in both the eyes, and he's undergone a history of trabeculectomy in one eye. So you know, okay, fine, you're dealing, and he's telling you that, okay, there's a painful diminution of vision, which is present in so many years. Then you know, okay, one eye has been operated for trabeculectomy. Probably we're dealing with a similar thing in the other eye. Also, if there is a history of surgery in the same eye, for example, if there's, say, for example, pterygium history, or they've undergone an excision for pterygium, or they've undergone a trabeculectomy. So what happens is when these eyes have been operated upon, so there's going to be a lot of scarring. So when you operate on them for the second time, you're supposed to expect that, okay, when I'm going to operate, there's going to be a lot of fibrous tissue that I'm going to deal with, or your trab thing might just fail because of excessive fibrosis and all, right? So that kind of history also gives you a lot, so that you can plan you can plan the surgery properly, or you can give a good prognosis to the patient. Then about the past systemic illness. So when you start reading ophthalmology, you will realize that that almost every disease in almost any part of the body that can present with ocular features, be it infections, be it autoimmune conditions, be it anything from diabetes to hypertension to leprosy to tuberculosis to syphilis to everything, almost everything has a presentation in the eye, and that is the beauty of this subject. So certain systemic conditions, they might actually be picked up by ophthalmologists even earlier than physicians. Okay, so for example, sometimes when you are doing a routine examination for a patient, he's just come to you for a routine examination. There have been a lot of times that we pick up abnormally dilated retinal vessels, right? So, then we'll ask them, have you ever got a blood sugars done? And they'll be like, no. And when you get them tested, they eventually turn out to be diabetic people. So a lot of presentations in the eye might appear a lot before they actually present in the rest of the body. So for example, certain autoimmune conditions, they might actually present in the eye earlier than presenting as the systemic manifestations. Certain infectious conditions like TB, leprosy may actually present in the eye first, as uveitis. There have been so many cases that come to us with diminution of vision, and we find, okay, when we examine them, we find that, okay, they've had uveitis. Then we order a battery of investigations for them, and that is when we realize that, oh, okay, all right, so this patient has suffered from tuberculosis and he is not even aware of it. Once we've gotten him investigated because of uveitis, then we realize, okay, there's a systemic condition involved in this presentation. Then for these systemic conditions, if the patient already knows them, then you have to ask whether he's taken any medication. Okay, first, yeah, and so why do you want to know if they've taken any medications, if they are on any medications? Is that because a lot of drugs are responsible for a multitude of ocular conditions that could arise because of them. So for example, if the patient is a case of autoimmune disease and they're taking steroids. Now steroids open an entire Pandora's box for a lot of ocular conditions, like it can cause open angle glaucoma in the patients. There could be central serous chorioretinopathy in the patients, or a reactivation of viral keratitis because of steroids. Then you have certain usual conditions like elderly male, they might just have benign prostatic hyperplasia, and they might be on tamsulosin for it. So what tamsulosin does to the eye is that it causes floppy iris syndrome. So now I know that if I'm going to operate on this patient, it's going to cause a lot of trouble. The iris may not dilate, or it'll prolapse out of my wound because it's a floppy iris. For example, the patient has had history of tuberculosis and the patient is on ethambutol. So we all know that ethambutol is known to cause optic neuritis, right? Now, very recently in trend is the hydroxychloroquine. So after a certain dose and duration, it's known to cause vortex keratopathy or bullseye maculopathy. So you have to know, everything to be able to put the two together. And after that, regarding the drug, you have to know what drug they're using, obviously, because then it will tell you, what class it belongs to and what it could cause in the eye, the dose of the drug, the duration of the drug, because the cumulative doses, eventually after a certain period of time might present in the eye, the frequency and the route that they've been using it. And other than that, you have to ask about history of allergies, if any, because if you give them certain medications and they're allergic to it, it becomes a medical legal implication if you haven't asked for a history of allergy in the past. So if I want to give post-operatively, I want to put my patient on NSAIDs for pain relief and they are already allergic, it's going to cause a huge lot of trouble. Now, in case the patients have undergone a previous surgery, you have to ask them about the time of surgery, the place of surgery, what kind of surgery they've undergone, and what kind of anesthesia. Now, why is this important? Is because certain surgeries you might be able to do in LA, but because of the systemic conditions of the patients, the anesthetist tells you that no, we cannot go with LA. We have to give them a general anesthesia. So with that also, you'll be able to surgically plan ahead for this patient that, okay, if I'm planning to do a surgery, I might have to give GA for this patient, even though I can usually do it under local anesthesia, right? So for the repeat procedure, it's very important you know that the previous, how was the previous anesthesia given and why was it, if at all it could be done under local anesthesia, why were they given general? And any history of blood transfusion you should ask. Then regarding personal history, the marital status of the person, the number of children the patient has, if there are similar presentation in their children also you can ask, but that majorly becomes a part of the next topic, that's family history. Then in females, it is very, very important that you ask them for their gynecological history because when you prescribe drugs, you cannot prescribe a certain scheduled drugs to females who are either pregnant or lactating, right? And you should ask for the dietary history because all of us know that consuming beef and pork could predispose you to neurocysticercosis, which could present in the eye as ocular cysticercosis, right? So what kind of diet they are having, that is also relevant in certain diseases. Then the habits like smoking or alcohol consumption and recreational drug use. Now, how is that important? I'll tell you. Smoking, it could lead to a lot of tumors, as we all know. It could aggravate a lot of conditions like thyroid eye disease. So it's said that if a person is a smoker, then the thyroid eye disease is likely to be 7 times more. It's 7 times more likely in a smoker, right? So it gets aggravated in those patients. And smoking could also lead to central serous chorioretinopathy in male patients, right? And then we have alcohol consumption. Now, what happens? You know one very important example from all your forensic classes that methyl alcohol poisoning can lead to toxic amblyopia. There's a lot of this is a very important question in forensic: wood alcohol and methyl alcohol poisoning. It's an important cause for toxic amblyopia. Then there can be recreational drug abuse, which first of all can have, when you examine and you see some sort of pupil abnormalities, it could lead to that, either because of stimulation of their autonomic system, or it could reduce the immunity of your ocular surface. Like ocular surface is supposed to be a barrier for protecting you from any infection, because the tear film has so many lysozymes and immunoglobulins, and epithelial barrier of the conjunctiva cornea prevents any sort of infections. But people who do recreational drug abuse, they are predisposed to keratitis because this barrier function or this defense mechanism is lost. Then coming to the family history, again, this is very important. You have to note it as what all members are present in the family, who all are there. And if there is a similar complaint in the family members, now that could suggest either a hereditary disorder, or it could, if you ask them for systemic illnesses or infectious illnesses in the past in their family, that could tell you, okay, for example, a person who whose father is probably a diabetic. So there are more chances that this patient eventually, like if it's a young patient now, eventually over time might develop diabetes later in life. Or if they were hypertensive, then there are chances that the kids would also be eventually hypertensive. So you have to advise them for lifestyle changes and be on the lookout for all these things. Then somebody, for example, who's in their family had a history of TB. Now they've come to you with painful loss of vision, and you on examination you find out that okay, we've had keratic precipitates, we have aqueous cells in flare, and we diagnosed this to be a case of uveitis. Now when you are uh, asking the patient, then they'll tell you, okay, when you ask them, okay, fine, is there a history of TB in your family, or have you ever suffered from TB? And they say, yeah, my wife had TB so many months ago or years ago. So then you know that, okay, on the top of your differentials, you have to keep this as one of the etiological factor for the onset for this anterior uveitis that has presented to you. So other than that, if it's a, a hereditary disease, then you have to be able to draw a pedigree chart for it. Then that brings us to almost the end of it. And so in the end, you should know that each statement, each questions brings a lot of difference to the end result, right? So everything that you have asked in your positive history, in your negative history, in your associated family or personal history, that all of it brings a lot of difference to your differentials. So on the basis of your history, you should be able to bring out a list of differential diagnosis. And they at the end of the history, you should write actually a list of differential diagnosis, listing the most common diseases in the beginning and the rarest ones to be mentioned later, right? After the history, when you examine, you will come to a most likely diagnosis based on the current clinical scenario. Now that is what is your provisional diagnosis. Based on all these things, you will order a battery of investigations that will eventually lead you to a final diagnosis. So in just the last slide, that these are basically just the tips for taking a good history. And the first thing that you need to know that the patient has a problem and you're supposed to be the healer or somebody who's going to listen to them for the problem. So you make sure that you introduce yourself to the patient and make the patient very, very comfortable. You have to be respecting their privacy and confidentiality while taking the history. It should not be like a hustle bustle situation or a fish market and you have like 10 people listening to his complaints. So when that is the situation, the patient may not come, be very open to you, and he will not tell you certain things that he thinks are stigmatic. For example, if the patient has history of HIV, they won't tell you. If there are 10 people standing around, if they've had a history of TB, some people find it stigmatic and they will not tell you of certain things. Or if, for example, when we have uh, ocular presentation of Behçet's disease, they will not tell you that they've had a urethral discharge or oral ulcers or anything like that. So the next thing is that you're supposed to ask questions which are direct, which are simple, and they can easily understand. Because if you complicate the situations, if you ask them in medical terminology for them, they might not even be able to understand what you're saying. And basically, they will not be able to even answer. And then basically, you are at loss. You will not be able to come to a diagnosis and you will not be able to treat the patient, and the patient will just go somewhere else. So you have to be a very, very good listener. You have to understand what they're trying to say, but at the same time also record only the relevant information. Don't, I mean, be a good listener, but that does not mean that you go on listening to the entire story and you go on getting confused. That is not the thing. Then you have to be seeing things from the patient's point of view, because if you don't understand what they're trying to tell you, sometimes for you it's not important, but actually they're giving you a very important history which, because you do not know, is relevant to your history. You'll just miss on it. And in the end, to be be taking a good history from the patient, you actually have to remain very, very patient. Hello. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of this class. And thank you. If there are any questions, I think you can put on the chat. I think one of you should, probably the class representative, they could send me the email address. I will mail the slides to them and then they can distribute to the rest of the students. Dr. Diksha, you're asking if the patient has history of diminution of vision along with white opacity. Can we write opacity also in chief complaints? Yes, you are supposed to actually put it in the patient's language, so you can write it, but make sure like over once you're done taking the history, you'll be able to come to a diagnosis. So you'll know what is relevant to your history and you ask the questions accordingly. That's about it. Dr. Ravi is asking if after cataract surgery, the patient is complaining of watering, what should be done? See, you have to first of all uh, examine the patient, okay, and find out what is actually causing the watering because it could be a lot of things. It could be because probably because of a surface aberration or like from the wounds if the patient's getting irritation because of those wounds or because of the sutures, it could lead to watering because of that. Also, there could be watering or, for that matter, discharge because the patient has probably developed a uveitis following the surgery. So you have to be first, examining the patient. Obviously, there's history, and then you have to examine the patient to actually come to a conclusion as to what needs to be done further. Dr. Swati is asking if it can be Horner syndrome. And because we haven't asked other things like drying of skin or drooling, etc. So yes, Dr. Swati, you have to know about Horner syndrome. So if the patient is coming to you with a presentation that you could possibly think is could be because of Horner syndrome, then you definitely have to ask further questions to either rule in the disease or rule out the disease. I think we are done with questions here. I will mail the slides to you and you all can. Okay, Swati, no, we cannot put the question as metamorphopsia because they will not come with that. They'll be like, I have distorted vision. So you can use that. They will not tell you that I have diplopia. They'll tell you I have double vision. So you have to record it in the patient's own words. Any other questions? Please send them fast because I think it's almost time. So I think we are done, uh, and I think just be ending the meeting now. Thank you all.